Roguelikes are one of my favorite game genres, but of all my favorite games that aren't Fallout New Vegas, a chunk of the rest of them are roguelikes. So when I first learned about Returnal's existence, I was immediately interested. Developed by Finnish studio House Marquee, adding to the list of great first-person shooters to come out of the mythical lands that is Finland. And it's from a studio that helped make Angry Birds. So here's Returnal. Returnal is a spooky sci-fi roguelike that plays a lot like a Metroidvania Souls-like, but with hundreds of projectiles. Trust me, I shoved as many keywords as I possibly could to describe this game, and that's the closest I could get. In Returnal, you play as Celine, an astronaut that you won't know too much about even after you complete the game, where she crash lands on the sentient planet Atropos and is now trapped there with no rescue. Returnal has a weirdly interesting focus on horror story elements and the occult, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. Every run in Returnal is a loop of repeating the world's cycle whenever you die. You have some insane speedy movements with lots and lots of cool weapons. There's about 11 weapons in the game, with only 2 of them being actual garbage. Weapons do not need ammo in this universe, they can only overheat. Whenever they overheat, you get a chance to overload the weapon. Overloading instantly reloads the gun instead of waiting the normal charge time. All of the guns have a few different traits and stats to them, like making this rocket launcher into a fucking minigun. But nothing has quite beat this toxic slug shotgun for me. This is the Spitmaw Blaster, an acid melting pellet shotgun. This weapon does pretty well early on, but kinda starts to slowly suck the further you progress. However, the further you get into the game, the more that you unlock the different traits of each weapon. For that shotgun, you get one called Slug Shot, and you start sniping some alien ass. All the weapons in the game have leveled upgrades that you eventually get the more that you use them, each of them fundamentally changing how you use that specific weapon. On top of that, each weapon has an alternate fire that does a fuck ton more damage, but with a longer cooldown. Of course, each gun has a different one with unique effects and projectiles. Something that caught my eye was how you build and upgrade Celine's suit. There's a bunch of consumables and suit upgrades and cool abilities, but we're not going to talk about those. We're going to stick to 2 specific items. We're going to talk about artifacts and these little cursed items called parasites. Artifacts are kind of like the items that you pick up in Binding of Isaac. Passive items that last for the entire run. The parasites are where it gets interesting though. They are little rapscallion aliens that attach to your suit permanently, unless you use specific items or this machine right here to rip them off. As long as they are attached, they give unique buffs and debuffs. They function almost exactly like the lunar items from Risk of Rain 2, but they're nowhere near as powerful. Most of these artifacts are usually passive effects that make weapons stronger. Actually, now that I think about it, this game has quite a lot in common with Risk of Rain 2. I didn't talk about the other upgrades because they're mainly linked to the world and level design. The zones are all dense and interesting areas that are perfectly made for the movement and the bullet hell enemies. Very beautiful landscapes with a biomechanical art style, from swampy forests to giant red deserts and chilly ice wastelands, smashed together with computer melting particles and an amazing sense of scale with all the buildings and environments. Doom Eternal is the closest parallel that I could make to describe how this game's levels are designed, with multiple layers of paths and platforms that you can use to finesse enemies, combined with how reactive and aggressive they all are. Every biome has unique aliens that all have unique attack patterns and projectiles. It quickly became one of the most chaotic shooters I've played since Risk of Rain 2. All of these flashy effects and interactions makes for some truly unique combat and boss encounters. And boy, this game is fucking hard, dude. There's a bunch of stacked mechanics that make the game way harder than expected, like these adrenaline levels that increase whenever you kill 3 enemies without taking any damage, which gives compounding buffs that last as long as you don't take any damage. It's the only reason I gave this game a light Souls-like tag. Some runs are just cursed and you get smoked like right away because the starting pistol sucks ass. But don't let this scare you away. It doesn't have the same notoriety as like a Souls game. More like just some of the mini bosses are kind of bullshit. But similar to Risk of Rain, I think it's okay that some enemies are kind of unfair. Most of the area bosses, except the first one, I beat pretty much on my first try. They all have very cool ideas, but aren't ultimately all that difficult. But I'll play devil's advocate a little bit. I am a bit of a roguelike goblin myself, so before even thinking about going to the boss, I clear out the entire area of a map, which is where the Metroidvania comparison came from. It's designed exactly like those games because many areas and paths are locked off behind upgrades that you don't have yet. For example, if you don't have the weird alien ankle monitor upgrade, you can't go into these underwater areas. Eventually, you do get a grappling hook that turns the game into a bit of a movement shooter with decent platforming. It gave me some heavy Metroid Prime vibes, minus the puzzles. Actually, I ended up finding the Samus skin for the game, and bro, oh my god, I cannot imagine what a Metroid Prime game like this would look like. So I just threw on the Metroid Prime soundtrack and just cried myself to sleep in dreaming what could be. Now, with how this game plays, you would expect the soundtrack behind it to be this spicy breakcore or some metal. But what they actually went for was a lot more atmospheric and unsettling. I would probably compare it to games like Resident Evil 1 and Silent Hill's soundtrack, with grungy, dense tracks that raise that tension to make sure you actually hit those shots, which I think is pretty fucking cool. There is some downtime thrown in with these psychological flashback sections and some of the weird fever dreams that Celine has. That house section reminds me a lot of the atmosphere that you feel when playing that game Visage. There's actually plenty of those in the game, so if you're looking for some light horror, it is in there. But here's the big difference between this game and other roguelikes. Whenever you start over a cycle, you restart from the beginning of the level, but you have a choice of whether or not you want to fight that area boss again. You could even go as far as skipping some of the levels if you've already completed them. And I like that idea for roguelikes, especially if you're chasing specific achievements and unlocks. Depending on who you are, the story is more about the time loops and Celine's mental horror being trapped on this planet. There's tons of dark undertones hidden in between some giga brain level of psychological depth. What I mainly liked was the way it was told. We learn the story alongside Celine. She knows just as much about this world as we do. Finding her old bodies from previous cycles and voice logs makes for some pretty interesting interaction. I won't spoil it, but I will say that the alleged main antagonist is pretty damn goofy. I'm not entirely sure what they were cooking or what exactly this antagonist is supposed to represent, but to be completely honest, the gameplay and the atmosphere is where the density is, and the rest is just a bonus. One core roguelike design that is missing though is that passive progression between runs. There's a few things that stay in between each cycle. The permanent suit upgrades, something called your proficiency, and an currency called ether. Proficiency is a persistent stat that determines what level your weapons will be. But whatever, that's not really important to what I'm talking about. There is a separate game mode called the Tower of Sisyphus. It's an endless mode in the game that you can get access to after you unlock the grappling hook. This mode has a few different mechanics compared to the base game. From what I played, there seems to be a lot more story that's hidden within this tower, which I'm too gamer-brained to properly understand, but I still enjoy the ambience and the different emotions this game made me feel. Just fair warning to anyone who goes into this game thinking it's a standard roguelike, because it's definitely not. The cheapest I've seen it on sale is for like 40 bucks on special sites, so feel free to pick whatever poison you like. But trust me when I say that it's well worth the purchase, because Returnal is a good-ass game. Yo, I have a Patreon that gains you access to a few extra benefits from me. It's where I plan my upcoming videos and a lot of plans for the future, so go take a peek if you're interested. Here's a few more of my other videos where I talk about a bunch of dumb shit that I like. So, take care everybody.